utility poles, lights, all those things that have to be maintained. And it's not unique to us, but it's compounded by the virtue of we are a regional municipality. There is no other amalgamation that is practical, so that has to be taken into context of where we are and our dynamic as a municipality fiscally being recognized in the provincial fiscal review. That recommendation 17 that was accepted by then, which is the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities, which is now the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities, and with the government saying the CBRM has to be dealt with differently given its complex set of issues from a relationship. So that's on the municipal side of it. What I know, and having served as president after my colleague Clarke Dethridge took ill, in stepping into that, you saw across Nova Scotia in that leadership role where the degrees vary, but the issues are out there. There are many communities struggling, and no different than what you've highlighted. People are asking where are they going to be 5 years, let alone 15 or 20 years from now. And we have different experiments that have been tried in terms of what I call the PICTOs with amalgamation, and that's a prime example of incentives coming in after the fact and people being almost forced into making a decision based upon doom and gloom rather than looking at collaboration and cooperation and agreements that actually build the region, whether that's fire, police, municipal services. So there's some lessons learned of what not to do there. What we've also seen is communities feeling they have no other option, whether it's Bridgetown, Spring Hill, Parsboro, but to literally turn the keys over and become part of a broader county government. And does it make the issue go away? No. In a temporary way, there's been some temporary measures put in place, but we're not the only region, I agree with you, struggling as to where our future is going to be. What I've also said is that you are correct as well. Halifax, by virtue of being our capital region and also from its just sheer size of the economy and the stability that's there, doesn't go without its own challenges, and growth creates its own problems. Mayor and council there have issues, and sometimes some of the real issues affecting communities aren't seen when we look at the core of the harbor to see that there's very much rural components and there's suburban issues. But if given the option, I would take Mayor Savage's headaches in the council versus the ones we face here. So in fairness, but I also know at the provincial table, we've had no better friend, colleague, and champion than the Halifax Regional Municipality in trying to recognize some of the issues being faced by the CBRM, and as well as being at the table of the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities to move forward. We put in place a partnership agreement that was dealing with our non-financial matters. That was, a couple of years ago, which was anticipated then we would deal with the stability issues. And even on that matter there, we're $20 to $30 million in discussion with the minister, the ministries, and the premier would have provided some stability in the short term so that we could realign. And I'm also a firm believer, and I have since becoming mayor, we do need a strong capital if we're going to be a strong province, but we need a stable rest of Nova Scotia. And that has been my rally cry, is how do we have stability in the rest of Nova Scotia, because we can't talk growth until we stabilize. And the stability should be focused on where growth and opportunity, and we have been, very much fixed on the task at hand at exploring what our natural assets of the port can do. But until those market-based decisions, while we've made improvements and we have some growth, it isn't what we all want to realize, and that is the international opportunities. But the industry will make those decisions as it comes.
But Mr. Mayor,
yes.
Really the question is, the money does come from Ottawa under law, and is to be divided up according to the numbers that we get from the province and from the federal. It's a vast amount of money. As a matter of fact, the amount that should be coming to us is almost twice what your whole budget for the Cape Breton Regional is. I compare it to Member 2, where there is a swamp for mosquito-infested area that has become a real wonderful example of progress. But they needed that federal money, and they got it because they're indigenous people, and they're doing great things up there. But as Dan Christmas says, we're a dying community. And the only way we can rehabilitate ourselves is to do the same that member to do. Get this money that's supposed to come to us, and it's called equalization, so that our taxes go down. If our taxes go down, then we have an opportunity to bring industry in here. I would not set up an industry or a business here in Cape Breton. The taxes are too high. And then if you buy a house, all of a sudden, your taxes go way up because the cap comes off and so on. So we need that money. They know we need the money. That's why they sent it down. The province knows we need the money and has given us the numbers, as John says, over 50% of that 26.8% should be coming to the Cape Breton Regional. And I'm sure that you understand what a great boost that would be if that $245 million per year had been coming, or will be coming, or would be coming to the CBRM. So many people are depending upon the council for giving them money for their non-profitable organizations and so on, and they're not able to do it. They're not able to help anybody in their own region, and they're not able to fix the roads. They're not able to handle the water supply, the washbook, and a myriad of other things that we could have if that money was available. So what we're really saying is, Mr. Mayor, what is your opinion on the money coming from Ottawa and not getting to us? Now, the provincial government has stopped the money from coming to us. We're not getting any of the money that's coming from the federal government for us for this particular purpose.
Right. So there's twofold things that, and I've talked about this even with Pam Berman that did the story, and that is there's the actual municipal services and supports from the province for municipal delivery and meeting the mandate of what we're legislated to do. And that is very much part of partnership agreements, fiscal review. All the elements, Father, are in place for us to move forward with a very constructive relationship as a municipality with the provincial government and with other municipalities with the provincial government. What we've lacked is the undertaking to actually finance those things on the municipal side. Federal, provincial, equalization transfers and the services that are then supposed to be provided and dispersed from that. When you look at the actual amount of money that is transferred on an annual basis versus the cost of healthcare delivery and social service delivery is going to exceed that. So what I would say is, let's talk about where we are today in Nova Scotia. And when we look at it in addressing it, if we address it as a Nova Scotia issue, there are needs elsewhere in Nova Scotia, different, maybe some similarities, but we have varying levels of need. So are we going to have a dialogue that talks about supporting need? One of the things the provincial government talks to the federal government about is we should be having not a per capita based funding for healthcare, but a needs based funding for healthcare, because it's not fair to compare our transfer to us to our citizens that have the highest and fastest aging population with the highest health needs compared to a robust economy like Alberta, who is a contributor. So we have to look at what they do is they contribute to helping, but the issue is you have less medical or health service needs in those provinces.
At that time, they got the greater portion of that accord. I think it was about 1.8 billion, and they got a little over $1 billion on it. The rest of the 0.8 was distributed across Canada. That's because it was done on a per capita basis without the consideration of the per capita need. But see, there's another thing there too, since you brought up the healthcare. Federally, in terms of the federal funding footprint, according to the Council of Canadians, under that accord in 2024, which is at the end of it, the federal footprint will be 18.6%. It started at 50. So they've got an issue there as well. And if you're going to continue to allow that to deteriorate in that area and then continue to use the equalization as an argument, you're going to kill it all the way around.
And so, as I say, we can go back and look at what all the numbers, how the calculation, we can talk tax rates, I know things we need to do. Like we have a commercial tax rate here that is crippling in its own right, and how do you have an adjustment that allows you to be more relevant and business friendly and grow so you actually bring more revenues in? And we've been in a catch-22 situation as a municipality in that process. So if you look at it, I think the dialogue should be what our needs are, our core needs as citizens of this province, within a municipality within this province, and how do we overcome some of those obstacles, at the same time being treated fairly and equally with other Nova Scotians and municipalities that are struggling as well, but are very much committed. And I can say, from our council point of view, we've dealt with our fiscal matters. We've done all the things that we were called upon by the other orders of government, and that is get your house in order, have your balanced budget in place, deal with your debt management. So we've done all those things, and with the historic burdens in place. And at the same time, what I'm saying is all the elements are there for informed decision making. We have over 50 some recommendations in the fiscal review that, if acted on, will make an immediate difference. So across Nova Scotia, and it will stabilize our municipality as part of this wider Nova Scotia family. Now, on the broader aspects of where we're at in terms of need, we have to start looking at. The government just recently said it's reconfiguration of health services for our community. Now, I can go into a number of things, but what I'd like to know is, we've talked buildings, but we haven't talked services. We haven't talked, outcomes. We haven't talked the budget around the capital versus the operating. Are we going to be better off? We all know that the current system wasn't working effectively for timely access to care. So everybody knew we had to have changes. But to have a change that's based upon, creating concern and worry and uncertainty is not what I consider, good governing. But for instance, as someone who lives in this community on the north side, it wasn't we're building this new facility, and when we build this new facility, we're going to phase out what was the North Side General Hospital, and we will prove these things out. It was very much closure, because for a soundbite, I believe, beyond this community. So if the government's going to invest $250 million potentially in this infrastructure, what operationally is it going to do? Because that's going forward. So I want to say, as part of your dialogue, is we should be asking, what does that really mean in terms of you're doubling the cancer center? Okay, so more health services are going to be available here. Less people are going to have to go for specialized services and cost elsewhere. We're going to try and get more timely access to ERs and stuff like that. What does that ultimately mean in terms of opening up OR space? How many specialists are going to be here that put what equalization transfers are for core services in our community? So I would be very much, and will be as mayor of this municipality, and looking at is, what does that ultimately mean for the betterment? Because that's where government has made a decision. They are going to put a significant amount of money into it, and I can argue how they went about it, or I can look and say, what are you actually going to do? The citizens want to know,
that's the question.
What is this going to mean in our community long term in terms of what a transfer would be? What are we doing if you follow the Justice Murphy with his decision when it came down to when the CBRM previously went to court? Justice Murphy, when I was starting in that role in terms of dealing with being on the provincial side and looking at back and forth when we were part of the government, I was the face of that locally. And by the time the judgment came down, I was then the Minister of Justice in that portfolio. And I remember reviewing that, and what came down on that was it was not under Section 34 of the Constitution that it was recognized, but Justice Murphy laid out the blueprint that wasn't followed up. He talked about economic development. It's right in the findings and the opinion and the ruling that if this was about economic development, if it was about fair economic treatment, then there's an argument that could have been made. So I look at it, there's the health and broader services, there's the economic development, and then there's our stability as a municipality, like what we do. And education, we can talk about that. That's a whole other moving target in terms of what our capacity. But on a budget by budget area, I've looked at education around the province, and the boards per capita and funding tended to flow somewhat in sync as far as education delivery. But on municipal and on other, especially health services, and then other supports for long-term care, housing, community service supports, those are areas where we have to talk about what do we need to go forward. And that is something that when you talk about historically, we know this municipality was under undue duress and stress right from the get-go, so it was always doomed not to succeed. And the truth is, Nova Scotia is not sustainable as municipalities under the current path. We all accept that. There's that realization.
But that was because they capped the money that they put in. The federal government certainly had a formula that said, hey, 26% is because of the lack of fiscal capacity.
Right.
Well, what is it that makes provincial politicians think that they're the best people to decide that they should take it all and they should dribble it out as they see fit? And certainly the influence is our civil servants, the bulk of them, live in Halifax. The benefactors are the median income in Halifax is higher than the Canadian average, significantly higher, in fact. And we're $20,850 less in this community, yet our tax rate. How can anybody even propose that's satisfying what the Constitution guarantees? Now you've talked about, a new charter, and I'm saying, well, take the charter and shove it, because we have a Constitution that's meaningless, absolutely meaningless, until provincial politicians start to recognize that the distribution that's sent out. And it's hypocritical on the part of the provincial government to sit and talk about the fairness on the healthcare issue, when in fact they give out 5.6% of what comes in. That's all that comes out. And unlike other governments previously, I was in Spring Hill at one point, and you're a former MLA that was there, I guess, when you would have been in office. Murray. Yeah. Murray said to me when I showed him the numbers that showed the entitlement, he said, well, where'd you get those numbers? I said, every government for the last 20 years has presented those numbers. Why would they do that? Well, the interesting part is that under this new open liberal government, we don't get those numbers any longer. They're not available to you, and they're not available to us. So until politicians like yourself recognize this 26% and say that should be administered by the municipalities, let them make the decision at the ground level. If we look at it and say, hey, you've got 12 people in your council, we have a mayor, we pay significant salaries, we have support staff. Are they incompetent? Well, no more incompetent than the civil servants in Halifax. And the other thing that's interesting is that the cap is morally and should be criminally, like it discriminates. We're not allowed to discriminate on sexual orientation, based on color, based on creed, yet we can discriminate against young people or new people or anybody that wants to make a change. And there was a local boy here that from Acadia that said we've got to change the way we do things in the province, but nobody said we've built a cocoon that says change nothing, because if you do, it's going to cost you money, upsize, downsize. And the benefactors of that are, again, the growth center, which is Halifax, because as their property values go up, they don't pay any more in taxes. They have $20,000 more per year. If they had to pay another $1,000 in taxes, what would it bother them? Not significantly. But to the average Cape Bretoner, another $1,000 worth of taxes a year, they're losing their homes. And you've got lists of them. And we've got, so who buys it up? Who gets the properties when they're sold off at a cheap price? I don't know, but certainly everybody is vulnerable in this community. So until we recognize that 26% has to be
Right, so let's just talk about the municipal stuff again.
Okay.
Is there a recognition we need the system is not working? Well, yes, we've already recognized that long ago, including you referenced the cap, but even the property tax, we're the most affected community, municipality in all of Nova Scotia by that, to the point of wanting to have it addressed, deal with the CBRM uniquely within that without creating and have an assessment of how do you phase in something new. Because automatically when you say we need to replace with a new system, people think that everyone's taxes are going to go up rather than actual an overall reduction in rates. And what was brought in to fix one problem created another, and all parties voted unanimously for that. So, but you're right, it's an issue, it needs to be dealt with. I recognize it, and I'm committed to dealing with it because now the cap is becoming more of a problem in more places in Nova Scotia, and it's emerging as a growing problem within Halifax Regional Municipality. So there's an issue we do recognize we have to deal with. If not, it'll be at our own peril. On municipal stabilization, just in terms of stability issues that we face, is a new arrangement required? Yes. And I've been very clear from my own point of view that an old formula that was never effectively put is not where we need to be. What we have to say is what is needed for us as a municipality. We've put all of the numbers out there. We have all the information necessary to make informed decisions with government. And if they're applied fairly, other municipalities will be treated fairly too. This isn't a one-off. We just happen to be the most impacted as almost 100,000 people. But there's other people being impacted across this province. So when people say about, well, let's just top up some more money and then we'll figure it out. It's like, no, we already have in place what we need to make the decisions to improve the system today.
We do?
We do. The information is before government, it's before the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities of, like I say, the fiscal review identified if we address these issues, we will have greater stability amongst our municipalities and greater strengths. Now, we can talk about...
the province, Mr. Mayor,
yeah.
The province has a formula that they've calculated what every different community should be having out of this equalization. They have a formula. And that's why we're saying a little over 50% of that 26% should be coming to the CBRM. But what we don't talk about, and they don't want me to talk about it because it's such a large amount of money, is that there's another 73% that goes to the provincial government to service what they are supposed to be servicing. And you were talking about that, the hospitals and the doctors and the nurses,
Yep.
the teachers and the schools, and the highways that belong to the province, and all the provincial services that come to us. See, they're getting not almost $1 billion in health transfers from the federal government, besides the almost $2 billion from the equalization funding. And so $700 million and $245 or so million is a lot of money that should be coming to the CBRM through the 26.8% and the 73% that's left over, from that.
Right.
And it's not getting here. And that's what we're talking about today, is you're talking about, manipulating the funds and all that sort of stuff.
What I'm talking about is a whole new program, Father. I'm an advocate for a brand new system, because the old system is just chasing numbers and we're going to chase arguments rather than start addressing need. And what our true needs are as a municipality, given the reality of where we find ourselves, and then if you address other municipalities' situations on their need and their reality.
But they've done that.
But John Morgan talked about that a couple of mayors back. I mean,
But the difference
the
now, John,
reality's been there for so long, and I've heard it from every government. I heard it, the Dexter made a speech in the House where he said
May the 5th, 2005.
he was going to correct it, okay? And what did he do when he got in there? Covered his own ass.
and actually canceled the MOU.
Okay, and he canceled the MOU.
That actually was helping the
That
municipality.
would have helped somewhat. So the reality is, playing with the numbers, why can't we accept the constitutional guarantee that says it's reasonably comparative levels of public service at reasonably comparative levels of taxation? If that money flowed as it should, and guess what? That most hated prime minister in Canada that just went down to Washington, okay, he's starting to find that there's others that are getting to be as popular as he was. But what was interesting was that he made it clear that he was not fond of sending money to Atlantic Canada because we were just a little bit too laissez-faire here. At least that was my take on it, but that may be too simplistic. But the reality is, even under his government, he met the constitutional guarantee. There was a couple of years when there was hardship and the money was cut back slightly, but overall, the fund has grown and grown and grown. Yeah. And the fees of our money are in Halifax. They're the MLAs who are prepared to do whatever their leader says. And we have a leader in Halifax now that said, I've bounced the books. Well, he bounced the books on the backs of the taxpayers here that are paying significantly higher taxes than the people in Halifax. Yes. And they receive at least 40% more money per household. I mean, how can that continue?
Yeah.
How can that continue?
Well, I'll come back, but I know you want to say something.
Is there a message that the feds are sending when they consistently negotiate the approximately 26% of the total transfer for the municipal weakness, and that is not being applied? Had that been applied, shall we say, going back enough, even from 82 when this was enshrined, we wouldn't probably be getting as much because of the development that would have taken place, and you wouldn't be...
Wouldn't need it.
Yeah, the need wouldn't be there. There seems to be, that message seems to be lost on the provincial politicians who have, unless there was some commotion caused here, I don't know if they'd still be looking at this program. They'd be still having that old one. And when you take that you're getting that kind of money, Maureen McDonald gave us the first 26%, it was 26.8 in 2011, when the transfer was $1,417,000,000. Yeah? So, I mean, she gave that, we got it confirmed from the feds, they continue to keep sending that.
Right. So,
and if it's not going to be used to reduce the municipal weakness, where is it going?
so from the point of view, and I go back to John, you had talked about in terms of, municipalities are a creature of the province. You want to talk about crowns.
Yes,
the province
absolutely.
and the federal government in terms of the mandate, and we're not changing the Constitution of Canada anytime soon.
I would have given them the keys a long time ago
well,
and said, hey,
well,
you take it.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, we could all amalgamate up to Halifax.
well, but let's face it, I'm a Nova Scotian who is very proud of where I'm from, and I choose to live here and work through the challenges here, and I'm not afraid of speaking up for here and in terms of what you know about this. So let's talk about, and I guess with the wider group, and you've got lots of citizens engaged, and I think you come back, there are things municipalities' core mandates are that we need to talk about that we're underfunded or lack capacity to do for our fellow citizens. And we've heard it from us, whether it's trying to get the cost share for roads, for sidewalks, for core basic municipal service delivery.
That's right.
That is an issue that has to be addressed, and I'm trying to have addressed and want to help address, but it's going to take a whole new relationship and a whole new way of going about doing it based upon municipals, the fiscal capacity and the needs and means by which communities are different. And if you don't go to looking at need throughout Nova Scotia, to what the communities need to be stable. And so per capita funding and per capita formulas are never going to pan out well at the end of the day, for people if we don't look at where those services are. If we want to talk about what is it we need, so healthcare. What are we asking the government to spend money on? If you look at healthcare for us, a lot of our specialty services, in fact, some of our Atlantic specialty services are within the Halifax health delivery system for specialties. And yes, you can call it lifeline, but as part of what we need for a region of 100,000 people plus, when you look at the region as itself, do we need a fixed wing aircraft here that is actually stationed here that are the services? So I'd like to have a discussion about what is it we require to have the services, because if you start addressing that, then you're going to address the funding that goes with a fixed wing aircraft that people can go, because what I hear from health professionals here is without those things, and if there's, in the case of an aneurysm, you don't have time on your side to wait for even a life flight to come down, where seconds and minutes and hours do truly count. So what the discussion as our community is, what do we need to be a viable community within this province and get back to being a net contributor to the interests of this province? And to do that is, where are the elements that we want? Because those are in the service delivery. The municipality is not going to be running the health system, the province does. We no longer are in the welfare interests in terms of community service, the province is. You know, we are in, and I know, Martha, you've been part of this a long time. When I first came in, one of the options was to get rid of transit in the community, and we made a political choice during tough times to maintain it. But by steadfast focus, our transit service is improving, ridership is going up, we try our summer things, we're doing things on our own, and we have had some incremental uptake, but
Yes.
it's still not funded to the capacity it should for the number of citizens that are here and the diversity of what the options should be. Council just heard today about, you know, some alternative things that can be done with transit. There is something that the province should be doing with municipalities. Core infrastructure, economic infrastructure, and I would go back to what is it we're doing on the economic aspect of things. And there is a case, and a strong case to be made, that we have to address property tax issues, municipal, like what is a minimal municipal tax rate that you build on in terms of other services. Because even here, because of Sydney, sitting in Sydney right now, you have a different tax structure because fire service is delivered by career versus other communities. So what are the things that we as people who live in this community are lacking and need supports for, and let's address going after the dollars. Are they legitimate, and should they be funded? But I'll tell you, if all we do, we're just going to take an argument from here, go at the provincial table and argue it, and then look to Ottawa and argue it, and I don't know where we're going to end up, and you're going to be back to square one. Again, to your point, we have the information now to make good, sound decisions for all municipalities in Nova Scotia. We have that. We have an opportunity to address what are some of the impediments to the viability of municipalities. In our case, CAP is a growing issue for us. Regional services, health services are big issues. So how are we going to address those? But as a municipality, and that's the separation in terms of, from a municipal point of view, I've sat around tables listening to a lot of common concerns from a lot of other municipalities that may not have the same population, but the same issues are being talked about. So,
And it seems to continue to fall on deaf ears when I'm talking about the province.
well,
That's my feeling.
so if you ask me, do I agree we need to do things differently? Yes. Do we have needs that are not being met? Yes. But we have to do it as part of a broader aspect that we have other fellow Nova Scotians that have issues, and ours just happen to be intensified and compounded at times here, depending on what the issue of the moment is.
But the province has recognized that by their formula. And that's why they say we deserve over 50% of that 26.8. And also, in my thinking, they must have the same formula for the 700 for the rest of the equalization formula, which would give us over $700 million to the CBRM. I mean, I'm not talking about giving everybody all this money and let us drink and, you know, and all that sort of stuff. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the government's obligation to give us good health services, to hire the doctors and nurses we need for those emergency
Correct.
rooms. They shouldn't be closing them. I was in the emergency department one night, 1 o'clock in the morning, 3 people there myself. Oh, it's going to be a breeze to get in there. We waited for hours because there were 7 ambulances outside with people all the way from Quebec to Quebec to Glace Bay, and there was not one ER open except the regional. You know, and that's
and those are the matters that we have to start addressing.
But, you know, it only can be solved by the province.
Correct.
Because
I agree.
that's a provincial
I agree with
obligation, and they have the money the money came from Ottawa. They have that $700 million that they should put into those services for us, as well as the 26.8%,
What's the reluctance to make all of this money that's coming in easily understood by the general public? In other words, why hide it in general revenue? There has to be some underlying scheme and manipulation considered when it's put in that way. Because if I'm to write the government and ask them, let's say for instance the Irving money, the $304 million or whatever, did that come out of equalization? And then they say, no, it came out of general taxation. How am I to argue it? But when you have that 1.8 billion that comes in, and you take, well, when I was looking at it earlier, it was only about 13.5 million from it. The other 18.5 came from the grant in lieu of taxes from Nova Scotia Power, in which we got badly treated in that one as well. But here's 13.5 million taken from the transfer, and then you have a program, a municipal program of 32 million. How many years? Obviously, in the years you've had what? 5 towns go under, 5 seeking it, and other struggling one. How long would this particular situation have been maintained unless there was some commotion raised somewhere about this thing is just inadequate in terms of the funding? You had the municipality study done with the question of balance, right? And they came up with approximately he said 37%, but approximately 40% of funding municipalities.
Well, and to the point that was raised about someone, the Now or Never and the Ivan report, I mean, what was missed was a great opportunity in Nova Scotia, that everyone came behind this. I know we had our own municipal community engagement session post that, and people and Nova Scotians were prepared that we need to make some big, bold decisions to go forward. That was accepted, and even people in our community gathered and said, we understand we have to do things differently, and then nothing comes of it. And then we worry about, we wonder why there's a mistrust and
exactly.
both the politicians and the system. So the missed opportunity, when it was laid before Nova Scotians by some very thoughtful people that listened across many different, all aspects of society, and a lot of consultation, and we missed an opportunity to have some apolitical, big decision-making done. If you come back to it, when you look at it, there needs to be new programs. And I will tell you, I don't think tinkering with the existing municipal equalization system is an answer. All you're doing is moving some more formulas. Are we going to address the needs that have already been dealt with?
But
I'm in
that's
favor
why
of dealing with that. And if I can just continue, part of what the MOU that I was part of the cabinet table to bring in was to take and uplift things like the education, corrections, housing costs. So municipalities' budgets were reflective of what their current mandates would be. Now, we don't have that as of now. The only thing we've achieved municipally within the CBRM is having the rate frozen, which means we get less money from Halifax right now from the provincial program. And again, that program itself is out of date to what our community's needs are. If you double the amount of money,
out
it's
of
not
date
gonna,
when they put the program in. They only accounted for 37% of the cost at that time. So it's but the other issue too is you brought up that the municipal people have an understanding of what they need in order to do what they need to do.
right.
However, and you did touch briefly for a second on it there, but I just want to accentuate it. Right now, the tax rate in Halifax, on certainly the best service piece of real estate in the province, is 121, and we're 226. So I guess I also look at it and say, hey, it's time that the citizens get equalization. Not just the municipal units that have been, in fact, I'd have to say they've been negligent in their behavior over the last number of years and have let the province cap the funds, so now it's 42% of a poor formula to begin with. And no, I'm not happy to see a new provincial formula, but I look at it and say, well, there is a federal formula, and now it appears that that federal formula has been extended for another 5 years without any consultation with anyone to speak of. Whether there'll be more discussion at a later date, but that's hard to say. But certainly there has to be a concern that if you have income levels that are significantly less and the tax rate is significantly higher, how can these people sustain themselves? That has to be dealt with. I mean, so there should be a number prepared by the people here in finance that sit and says it's going to take X number of millions of dollars to bring our tax rate down to the equivalent of Halifax. I mean, we're saying we'd be happy to have it the same as Halifax, even though they earn 40% more than we do. We're prepared to.
Well, and they're critical mass, and I don't begrudge. Good for Halifax.
Well, it's not good for Halifax, because if you look at it, you say, well, if you look at Halifax, we do know that provincial politicians and provincial civil servants are prepared to discriminate against this region because they did it with Nova Scotia Power. There is no other company. I mean, when John R. MacDonald was selling cookies right across Cape Breton, guess what? There was no tax money went to Port Hawkesbury. It was paid into the city of Sydney, okay, because that's where our building was located and that's where we got taxed. But Nova Scotia Power is unique in that it's the only one. So that was a deal made by the politicians of the day, and it denied this region. So we know that they're prepared. No one can say, well, we're being fair. Baloney, they're being fair. We know they'll rip us off if they have the opportunity, and then they did so. And that would have been significant if over that period of time that Nova Scotia Power was there, if we were receiving the taxes for the facilities that were in this region, you wouldn't be suffering with the budget that you have now. That's for darn sure. So to sit and say that they won't discriminate, no, can't go there.
The only way that they wouldn't discriminate, or they'd have a harder time doing so, is if there was full disclosure on what they do with this money. Why is there that reluctance to do that? You know, going back a number of years, in the provincial Hansard, a colleague of yours, Mark Perron, he thought Cape Breton Island, not CBRM, he thought Cape Breton Island got half of the federal transfer.
The total.
And it was capped at 32 million. You know, this lack of information, government secrecy and so on is contributing to this problem. And the only way around it is open it up. Have the full disclosure. This money comes in from the feds, and it's coming in year after year. That has to be the focus there, the 26%. If it's being provided for the weakness of the municipal units, why can't government start there and address it? Whether you get the whole amount, maybe not. But there has to be some providing of that information to the general public to see that this thing is being done fairly. Right now, there's no evidence that it is.
Well, when your entire strategy is about continuing on a process of an equalization transfer, and I do believe that the Now or Never report, the Ivany report, was really about how to get Nova Scotia back on track so that you can be a net contributor to your own well-being and a net contributor to the well-being of your nation, versus receiving, you know, a social transfer from other provinces. And the irony of, you know, so we as Nova Scotians have some other issues, as a province have some other issues to address. You know, if we want to talk resource development versus, you know, receiving money from people doing resource development in Alberta, transferring money in to transfer to us. And ironically, lots of daughters and sons of this area are working out there contributing to that transfer. But at the same time, are we open for that development ourselves in this province? You know, there's bigger issues as well that we have to deal with if we're going to be relevant. I mean, part of my focus is, and part of economic development was not overseeing the process of last one, you know, shut off the lights around here. It's trying to get some stability, and stability is based upon growing the economy. And so,
But you're not gonna get the growing of the economy unless the tax rates go down,
correct,
unless the infrastructure is improved.
which takes a
And
new,
that's what I'm talking
That
about.
would be built
membership.
into the 26%.
but in fairness, folks, topping up existing antiquated programs is not an answer.
It's not an antiquated
versus
program, it's an ongoing
a
program.
new relationship with
But
municipalities.
it was
including
No,
CBRM.
it's to recognize
The law.
the logic of this.
Yeah.
No one recognizes that this 26% was sent because it was destined for the municipality.
No one will discuss that.
No one discusses that. Like, the people that want to run this province don't want to recognize that. They want to take the whole pot, except for a little bit of it that you could, which is useless. For all practical purposes, that $32 million, what it'll do for this project. But that's not what they send. They send a significant amount more. And that other 74% is to equalize. And yes, maybe, in an if it was properly adjusted, the people that are earning the incomes in Halifax and who have the pensions in Halifax would end up having to pay more. But until politicians like yourself are prepared to recognize the real world
And why it's being provided.
and why it's being provided, it's a game over. Like, we better get out.
Because Ottawa doesn't want to talk about
Dan
it. They don't
Christmas
want
is
to talk
saying,
about
get
it.
out. And I mean, unless politicians like yourself can bring yourself to recognize the fact that that 26% is sent for a specific purpose, that would cure the problem very quickly. Every community that would receive money next year
Could start to heal.
would start to heal instantly, and they would bring this province up to. But if you're
Yeah,
going to
but-
continue
Yeah.
to let the money go into this
General
capital
revenue.
city, right now, plans are afoot for a new stadium. Well, guess who's going to pay for it? Guess who's going to pay for it? It's going to come from general revenue, because unless they get money from the province to do it, and the World Trade Center, all of these issues, Neptune Theater, what are we getting for our little St. Andrews Theater down here? What do we get? I mean, there's people in there begging from you because now
Our capacity.
ECBC is gone. Our capacity here is zip. But that's been recognized by the federal government. Yet provincial politicians don't have enough moxie to recognize that what's that all about? It's a pretty simple issue. That's a huge amount of money. And take it away from those people. Take it away from the people that have been stealing it and who have capped it, and you were part of the capping. You may, as Justice Minister of the day, you didn't have much choice, or you would have been like Mr. Mumbercat. You would have been gone if you didn't support the leader of the day.
No, and
that
I
says,
didn't, but in fairness, I didn't fundamentally agree with the approach then, and I know there needs to be a new approach now.
yeah, but
But no, you open the door, so if you're gonna have that, I mean, I stand by what I said back then, and in terms of my role as mayor, I've been fully vested, our council has been fully vested in being part of bringing forward solutions for our community as part of a Nova Scotia-based effort. All the elements are there, so if you're asking, if you ask me, do we need to be treated differently? Yes. Is there fairness that needs to be applied across the board? Yes, there is. And I'm fully committed to that, on that basis, when we talk about municipal and what we require. Do we need to have a new approach about economic development and delivery? Yes, we do, because there is no delivery in terms of where we are. We're struggling as a municipality. We have these sidebar debates over regional enterprise networks, when that is not going to drive changing the economy fundamentally.
changed in
We
40 years.
had a session from Municipal Affairs yesterday about opening up what our borrowing capacity can be, or in terms of other things like high-speed internet, which means the provincial program for that and federal programs, and allowing municipalities to start applying. I read that as costing people more money. They're just teeing up a process for a system, and that's the current government's decisions, the government of the day. What I do know is, and again, that this municipality is fully prepared to be able to respond to any positive changes that can be brought forward. And again, all of the heavy lifting has already been done. So when you're on the basis of decision making, it's about making those decisions. If we want to talk about how funds are allocated and going forward, then we need to talk about what is it we want for the needs. So what are the social needs, the human needs of our community that there are gaps in and we need to address? And that primarily is in the healthcare, and then seniors and community services. So just to, you follow them through. As a municipality, we're more than capable and prepared to do what we're mandated by legislation to do. But there's all these other things. We're in economic development, not because the legislation says it, because we have no choice. And we're trying our best with whatever limited dollars. And when you do make a decision to invest in something for economic development, you're not putting a new sidewalk in. Like, that's what municipalities' functions were, is to provide basic services for people to be able to live and function well in their community. The broader aspect of all these aspects of transfers and services, but I would say this, John R., going back, and we can look at stats and everything we want. Where are we going forward? How do we move going forward? And what is it we want to define as our needs as citizens of this community that want to be relevant and treated fairly? And I can tell you, there's lots of citizens elsewhere that want to be relevant and treated fairly too.
Well, I've been to many of those communities.
Right.
I traveled to Spring Hill, I traveled to Canso numerous times.
So make this a note.
And they're gone.
So within our community, it isn't just a CBRM dialogue. Like, this is, because what they want to throw it out at times is saying, this is just noise from the area, we're not getting enough. Well, where do we need these resources to go? Well, we know we have we have a growing diabetes situation here, in terms of, there's all kinds of needs that are coming. Are we addressing those needs? Are we, when we talk about moving a health service, you're going to shut down a hospital that has a dialysis unit because we listened to what the people wanted and put one for services there. Is the new health center going to have a dialysis unit for 20,000 people on the north side part of this municipality? Those are things I want to address because I think they need to be addressed, and they're going to need financial resources to address them. Our seniors' needs here, whether it's long-term care, assisted living, supportive, home care, those needs are not going to go down in the near future. They're only going to go up on a per capita basis for us. So are we going to address those? So I guess I can go back. I'm not at the national table when it comes to the Prime Minister and First Ministers. I'm a mayor that has set out to do what we can do within our powers. We've been responsible fiscally. We've dealt with our measures. We've got our priorities straight. We made sacrifices to do it with less money from Halifax. We have a certain level of stability, admittedly. But I can tell you, I admit, we're not sustainable. We know that. Everyone else knows that because, like I say, recommendation 17 of the fiscal review recognized it as well. So I'm not going to go, just so you know, I'm not going to go on a campaign of arguing what numbers were. I don't mind talking about what our needs are and where we need to go. Because governments, you can say it, are not going to go down that road. And by the way, I was part of progressive conservative government to come into, we had an NDP government that stopped what we were starting, at least to make those improvements. And we have a Liberal government that at least froze the decline, but it didn't make things better, but at least froze it. I'll give credit where credit's due to the Premier when he at least allowed us to work. But last year our budget was a cutting budget again. We started to cut. We were making progress, and then we start to regress. It's not sustainable. I know it. Everyone else knows it. So on a go-forward basis, what I'm looking at is, what is it we need to do, and where are the service deliveries or programs our citizens should have access to, and then say, where are the gaps in our community? And let's talk about those gaps, and let's talk about those gaps with our other, Nova Scotians that are experienced, like you referenced. Then if you have that narrative going forward, because I'm not interested in just going and beating a drum that just makes it sound like they just want more, because we don't, to your point, people don't understand equalization. They don't realize that municipal equalization isn't the federal equalization program. It's a provincial program. that someone put the tag equalization. And the numbers, as you say, from what the formula was versus reality, well, I can go back and argue and argue and argue, or can I say, we actually have the information
Okay,
to
yeah.
go forward. Do we need to have a new approach? Yes. Do we need to make
I
it?
don't argue
Yes.
that we don't need a new approach,
Yeah.
but until
So
somebody's
how are we
not
gonna
prepared
get
to
that started
recognize the
then?
Constitution, not prepared to recognize the reality
Yeah.
of what the federal government said, I don't think we can go anywhere, because it's still a shell game. It's somebody up there
Manipulated.
manipulating.
We have
I
to look
don't-
at the name of it too. I mean, equalization is, and the purpose of it, Charter of Rights, Human Rights Act, they all say it's to equalize the economies and opportunities for Canadian citizens as a whole,
Yeah.
right? And when we have 15.4% unemployment and they got 5.8, that's not equal. There's nothing equal about that. So we're not being afforded the same opportunities.
Right.
Obviously, the health.
And the truth is, it's very difficult to get.
And also, too, Mr. Mayor, the tax rate. I mean, progressive conservatives are all about business, and that's great because we need more of it here. But at the tax rate, why would a business come to Cape Breton Island or to CBRM? I mean, doesn't that have to be the first thing? You want things that need to be
municipalities
glad.
have Catch-22.
Like, wouldn't that be the first thing? I mean, why would a business come here? I have a man that you know, and he has a building in Sydney and a building in Halifax, and the building in Sydney costs him almost 3 times the tax as a building in Halifax, and it's just out by the Ford dealerships out there, Steels or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's nothing equal about that, and we're not going to get businesses here. And that's the business is where it is today,
And that's-
small industry,
so there,
right?
So what do you have to do to reset that? And what measures are
Okay.
needed to get
Yeah.
municipalities where they need to be viable going forward? So there's immediate mitigating things that can deal with stability, but there's a long term. Structurally, municipalities, we want to talk municipalities, and here's mayor right now. If you want to have another discussion another day,
Yeah.
that's not for City Hall, it's not for outside this building.
Right.
But in terms of how we go forward, in dealing with this, again, all the information is there to
Okay,
make some informed decisions. And I would hope our community, and I would say this, John, with all sincerity, people here arguing over our numbers and formulas, and they hear the Constitution, what they do associate with is how many people are going without procedures here and services here. You know, should we have a fixed wing aircraft at the Sydney airport for a life flight from our community, housed from our community, for the benefit of the citizens, for good, reliable, and timely access to care? Those are things that all take resources, but they're actually what the purpose of the funding is for the well-being and the public good.
But you're talking about looking to the future and so on.
But I'm not living in the past,
Yeah, but
Father.
we don't have a health authority here to tell the provincial government, these are our needs. That's all
Well,
decided now in
no voice.
Halifax.
Right, but if
And
you're
the educational, they've taken that away from us. They're deciding what we need for our educational services down here.
And-
We're not being able to do it, and you're talking about, negotiating and all that sort of stuff. But the money is there for us, but, we have to have control over this. We know what we need, I know what we need, you know what we need, but we're not getting it. And we're not transparent.
No one is arguing what you're saying
no.
Yeah.
is necessary.
So-
But the thing is, unless you also have the zeroing in on where the funding is provided, you're also providing them as well with all of the problems that you would identify, as you said, as necessary, which I don't disagree with.
No, me, I agree.
And once you identify them all, then you're also getting them to focus on this money that is provided by the
So we
feds
get them services.
to achieve those deficiencies that you're
And it's
identifying.
always going to use the word shell game. I think John or someone did
I did,
before
yes,
you did.
absolutely.
Okay, yes. And you know what? It's going to continue to be a shell game if we're arguing a formula. If we start talking about core needs, like I can list out everything in our municipality.
Okay.
We can pull in as mayor. I can show you where our gaps are and where our capacity may be different and how we can better address
How
it.
much would it take to bring the tax level down to the same rate as
We asked Marie Walsh that.
So the part
One
yeah.
thirty that has a 230.
Yeah, part and parcel, we'll just move on. Part and parcel with anything is recognizing what's going to create an adjustment. Everybody knows our tax rate, to have the highest commercial tax rate, not in Nova Scotia, in Canada. It's a
Yes,
catch-22
I
because
know.
you're damned if you do and you're damned because you
don't.
can't. Not that you don't, you can't.
You can't.
And so you have to say, in order to adjust that, what would be the impact of trying to lower it?
Yeah.
So there's going to be a cost to
Well,
do
if-
that.
if-
There's gonna
if-
be- So those are discussions, like I say, if you wanna have a discussion another day about provincial stuff, that's fine, but I came here as mayor to tell you, to say, as a community, we, as the elected officials, have done all of the heavy lifting
So it's all-
necessary.
that's all done.
And have been a full partner across the province, so that we are part of a Nova Scotia consensus and voice, with the support of the people of our capital city, that happens to be Halifax. And I'm not running, I want Halifax to keep growing, but I don't want us to die. And I keep talking about stability. And that is going to be the political discussion that's necessary, and one that the people of Halifax recognize. They don't want the rest of the province to fail, because guess what happens? They will fail eventually.
They're-
They will,
Exactly.
they
So-
will, absolutely.
But that doesn't have to be the case, and that's
No,
not where my
and we're
interests
not-
are,
no.
or where council is.
We're not wishing
But
that either.
I do understand that when you talk about, the shell game, and look, as a community and as a group, as you gather with citizens and from all walks of life, we have to start addressing what are the gaps that we need to be funding. Because when you start talking about this is where we're not getting, these services aren't here, these programs aren't here, this initiative should be here, then we can collectively go after those things, because otherwise we're chasing formulas.
Yeah.
That's all we're doing.
But the thing is, you said we have everything in place, but how are you gonna get them to negotiate with us or to talk with us? When I say the province, I mean, everything is put in place, so we have to deal with the province for this, don't we?
The Irving shipyard
You know?
that we
Ignore me.
paid for
Yeah.
from equalization dollars.
Yeah.
Where do the taxes flow?
They're gonna go into general revenues.
No, they go
Eventually.
into HRM, right? Shipyards, the Navy patrols the whole East Coast, goes into Halifax. We can't win unless we get this formula to take place. And the federal government have recognized that it's 26%, and so has the province recognized it. You're not prepared to recognize it, it appears at this point. You're saying that you'd sooner have
Well, I'm
A
gonna say,
list
if
of
you
things.
want me to go on that, to march that hill, I can tell you, I can march up it, but I ain't coming back down with a solution for you. So you gotta decide, do you wanna start talking about a process that can actually start getting outcomes, rather than having a constitutional debate? Community need,
But hasn't the
Citizen-
But that's not a
I'm not
constitution.
gonna, but in fairness, I'm just not, you're not going to succeed in addressing what you're trying to address, and that is the needs of our citizens and the services they require to be fairly treated. And as I say, if you start addressing those topics, then it's a lot easier to go after how you resource them and
Well,
fund.
then the resourcing is the
But it's
26%.
not- But it's, you're gonna get into, it's just gonna be, we might as well start going around the mulberry bush now.
No.
That's where you're gonna
Well,
go.
the feds are providing that each year.
And people are looking at PEI.
We're not
and their
asking for
model,
more.
because their model in PEI is working for them, and their taxes are equal across, and
Perfect.
And they're a province that was,
Like
they have the benefit of confederation.
Yes, they
Yeah,
do.
they do. So you can't compare
compare
one
it.
island to another. They're a province.
So my question is quickly, I know you have to go. How are we gonna get these things addressed? As a municipal government, you have all these things in place. So how are we gonna start moving forward? How does that happen? I mean,
It's
you've
the
been
provincial government, it's provincial.
there,
all the
that's
work has
my
been
point.
done.
And
The
when
work
they
has
don't
been
wanna
done.
have, when they don't wanna have dialogue with you or with us as citizens, how are we gonna be able to move forward?
Can't.
That's my
See,
question.
see, there's a lot of
We'll have
manipulation.
that
Lumber camp
discussion.
wouldn't even meet with
we're
us.
not, we're not going to be able to move
I mean,
forward because
and so for the previous.
There's a lot of
decision.
manipulation going on. I mean, you transfer these funds, quote, unconditionally. No provision was set up for that, no matter where you look in the Constitution.
We can have a discussion.
Oh, I know,
We
but
can have a
you-
discussion about another life pursuit I might have, but it's not, again, I have to respect as well.
Yeah.
Here as your mayor, as opposed to,
But the province is
Anything
not
else?
following its own investigations and so on. They're putting the money in general revenue, they're using it wherever they want. It's against the law, we're not getting our money, and we're not able to make decisions. They've taken away our health authority and our Educational Authority,
I'll take
and
that with
they're
me,
making
drinking
all
in
the
the car.
decisions from Halifax, so they're leaving us with nothing.
And when Karen
And that's
Casey,
where the problem is.
when Karen
The
Casey
money is there
tells,
to help us, to lower our taxes, to increase our infrastructure, and the other $700 million that should come to us is the province's responsibility to take care of healthcare, education, doctors and nurses and that sort of stuff, and their roads. They're not doing it. And we know that.
And there's
they
where
will
the
not,
dialogue needs
they
to be.
will not
That's where
say,
the dialogue needs to be.
this is the money we came in, almost $1 billion for healthcare, 1.9 billion for equalization, 325 million for social services. Where is that money going? Oh yeah, we put it in general revenue. You should put that in a special, you know, if I were paying you to do something for me, I'd want to see what you were doing and how you were using the money I was giving you to build this or whatever it was. I want to see. The federal government should be looking at that, at the provincial government saying, where are you putting this money that's supposed to be helping these communities? There's this CBRM and there's Yarmouth and there's Spring Hill and so on. What are you doing for those communities?
Back in 2006, Father, the achieving the national purpose, putting equalization back on track, it was the expert panel on equalization and territorial formula financing. They came out and improving governance and transparency. They said a more rigorous process should be put in place to improve transparency, communication, and governance. That was in 2006. We'll all be dead in this community unless we rise up and take charge.
Yeah,
Because that was a recommendation by the federal government's own committee, and yet there's no more transparency. They still have it so that it's sent unconditionally to a bunch of shell game players in Halifax who are prepared to discriminate against all the municipalities across this province, and this province is dying. And guess what? You're true. What you said is true. Halifax will die with it. They haven't got anything going for them. They don't even have a port there. They've got 750,000 boxes. That's not even being in business. It's a joke. So this province is going to fail. And the fastest way to get growth in this province is to recognize the 26%, and it appears that nobody's prepared to recognize it.
We might have to agree to disagree on certain elements, but
Yeah.
we'll agree
But
to keep
still.
talking.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Cecil.
Thanks, Father.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.